Lord. It's right there in the Word for your mind, your body, and your soul. It's right there in the Word. The Word of God will set you free. It's right there in the Word. Eternalizing is the key. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word. It's right there in the Word.
Good afternoon, Word family, and welcome to today's installment of There's a Word for That. The weekly word presentation is part of the Hymns with Phil Carter Fellowship. I'm Pastor Cynthia Turner-Wood, and I'm delighted to be with you again today. Let's go ahead and get to work. Today's word is speak up. Speak up. One of the things that has often gotten me in trouble in my life is my willingness to stay quiet when I should have spoken up. And also, on the flip side, my unwillingness to keep quiet when being quiet is the safest thing to do. Lately, though, I have found myself leaning toward the latter more than I have the former. I have had the hardest time seeing injustices and not speaking up, a hard time settling for a crazy, chaotic status quo in these trying times, when it's obvious to any sane person that something drastic needs to be done. Something needs to be done to fix the wrongs that we see all around us. And I've had a difficult time, and I imagine you have too, just sitting back and silently ignoring the wrongs that persist so loudly around us. Just ask my husband. I can't keep quiet when watching the horrendous stuff that's going on in the news, like when they reported this past weekend alone that there were more than a dozen mass shootings, and the politicians that we pay to do something about it make every excuse to dance around the issue rather than to do what we hired them to do, what we elected them to do. They just seem stymied when it comes to taking any action. Did you hear me? I said last weekend alone, not last week, not last month, not last several months. Last weekend alone, more than a dozen mass shootings. I can't keep quiet when I hear that the fully armed police stood by and did nothing while little fourth graders and their teachers were being mowed down, and the only person who did anything was an unarmed mama who ran into the school, grabbed her children from two different classrooms while the gunman was shooting, and while other armed police officers stood nearby doing nothing. She rescued her babies, declaring that if y'all won't do anything, I'll take matters into my own hands. It's hard to keep quiet while the systems that were supposedly designed to keep us safe are the very systems that are taking us down. How is it that the Supreme Court is set to rule on the sanctity of life when it comes to bearing children, but have no concern about life when it comes to keeping them safe and healthy once they are born? How is it that the education system is afraid of children learning a truth called critical race theory, but have no problem continuing the lies of traditional history that says at least the enslaved people were happy and well fed and housed and employed? That's craziness. I have a hard time keeping quiet when every day we are used for target practice at the grocery store, on the street, in our homes, eating ice cream, jogging through the neighborhood, walking down the street, driving our cars, at the gas station, in the dormitory space, in the classroom, and even in the church. It's hard to not speak up when the lack of access to quality health care is our story every single day of the week, and the social determinants of health reveal every day that we are more likely than our white counterparts to die from hypertension, from heart disease, from obesity, from childbirth, from AIDS, from all of the cancers, and pretty much whatever else ill you can name. In the richest country in the world that finds billions of dollars to deal with world issues, but always comes up short when it comes to our issues. Like in 2021, you remember this, don't you? When the U.S. Border Patrol on horseback whipped Haitian refugees as they were fleeing their horrible conditions in their country. Homeland Security says we can't let them in this country because we just don't have the space. We don't have the resources and we don't have a plan to let them in, which always seems to be the case when the migrants are sun-kissed. But let something go wrong in some other part of the world where the people are less tanned and we seem to find the resources that we could not find before. As a matter of fact, we will fly them in, put them up in furnished housing, pay their rent, buy them food, and set them up for a new start in this world and in this country. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that we should not do that. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying that in a nation that is as great as ours, it should be happening for vanilla as much as it's happening for chocolate and for caramel and for coffee and for cocoa and for honey, if you get my drift. Now, I could go on and on down this path, but I would purport to you that every child of God is called on in troubled times to speak up and continue to do so. And if we do not do that, then it won't make any difference. And even though none of them is my situation, none of those things I named earlier is my situation particularly, they're really all of our situations because it's hard for us to keep quiet knowing that these things are going on around us. That's the conundrum that I want to bring to you this afternoon in this text that I'm highlighting in the book of Esther. It's the conundrum that was confronting Esther that fateful day when Mordecai sent word to her that trouble was on the horizon, that Haman hated the Jews so much that he had paid the price to have them all annihilated. Now, Esther had a choice in the matter. The choice was the same one that we all face when crisis hits. The choice was to speak up and risk our own comfort or keep quiet and not say anything. Here she was chillaxing in the palace, a girl from the hood passing as royalty. She had it made. She had it so that she had arrived. And if she could just keep quiet, maybe she would survive under the cover of the palace. Or she could do what she had been positioned to do. Do you hear me? What she had been positioned to do, and to risk it all, rise to the occasion and answer the call of the moment. And that's really all I came to present to you today. You may not be a queen or royalty or a king or a prince or anything remotely like that, but there comes a time when every child of God is faced with the decision to either speak up and do what's right, even when it's outside of your own well-being, or to shrink low and stay safe and comfortable. Because all of us have the power of voice, to not sit comfortably back when the injustices are all around, to not say anything about what we see. All of us have been given some rank to say something when we see something, and then some of us have even been put in a position to go one step further and do something, even if it means harm to our own selves. That's what Mordecai finally convinced Esther of. It was her uncle who had set her up to get to the palace. And he said, "Look at here, Hadassah." He didn't really call her Hadassah in that moment, but I imagine in my sanctified mind that he did call her that because that was her name before she became Esther. That's the name she grew up with in the old neighborhood. It's the one that was closest to her. The one that the ones closest to her would call her, who knew her back then and back when. That was the name they called her. We are good for making up names for people. We have our formal name that we were born with, and then we have that name that our loved ones call us. Peanut and Pookie and Sister Girl and Baby Boy and Boo Boo. And as a matter of fact, I don't even believe Mordecai even said Hadassah when he called her. I think that in case she was having second thoughts, I bet he said, "Look here, Hadassah." Not even Hadassah, but look at Hadassah, taking her all the way back to her childhood. Don't think that just because you have arrived, because you happen to have landed in the royal palace, that you will escape what every other Jew is facing. When Haman comes, he's coming after us all, including you. As a matter of fact, you need to know that this is your moment, but if you miss it, if you flunk it, if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will still come to the Jews. It will come from a different direction, but here's the thing. You and your father's family will perish. In other words, it may not come in our lifetime if you don't speak up, but who knows that the very reason you have been placed where you are placed in your royal position is precisely for such a time as this. I need somebody to hear that this afternoon, that perhaps you are where you are, facing the dilemma that you are facing, because it is for such a time as this, that you've been prepared and you've been groomed and you've been positioned and you've been placed, not to just make it for yourself, but to make it so that you can save somebody else. Thankfully, Esther heard Mordecai's appeal with fresh ears this time. She understood with a newfound sensitivity. He reminded her how they are both part of the same place and part of the same time, and that they have shared memories, and her arrival at the palace won't mean anything. It won't even save her. It won't even mean anything to her if she has nobody else to share it with. I like that point right there, that what good is it for you to arrive all by yourself and have nobody else to share the joy with? Like when Harriet Tubman, the one known as the Moses of her people, finally reckoned that she had to leave the South and go for her own safety. She said, listen, I had reasoned this out in my mind, that there was one of two things I had a right to: liberty or death. If I could not have one, then I would have the other. For no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted. And when the time came for me to go, the Lord would let them take me. But she also knew, and this is the part that I want you to get, that it was not just about her liberty or her freedom, for it was freedom. For what was freedom if she was the only one she knew who was free? So that the first time she made it to freedom, she recounted after she got there with joy to having made the trip, but also with sadness, because she said there was no one there to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and my friends were all down there. But I was free, and since I was free, they should be free too. Harriet was right. That's why she returned time and time again back to the South to free others, back to make sure that her relatives could get free too. And I think the same spirit that motivated Esther to do the right thing was what was in Harriet when she did the right thing. At first, when Esther heard Mordecai's reasoning and seeing his own refusal to be comforted, she tried to reason with him. She said, look, Uncle Mordecai, you know this is not going to be easy. In fact, everybody knows that it's even against the law for me or anybody to approach the king without the king approaching them first. She tried to remind him of the constraints that were around her. She wanted him to realize what it would cost for her to go before the king. And not only would it not be easy, but she also realized that time was of the essence. Mordecai said, listen, you cannot go if you don't want to. You can think about this thing and decide that you're not going, but don't think you're going to be saved. Don't think that you, among all the other Jews, are going to escape this this fate that is awaiting us. It's matter of fact, baby, it's on you, and you've got to do something. You've got to say something. I believe that that's also what he was saying to her, is that she was going to have to go, and she was going to have to go alone, and that it was not going to be easy, but she would have to take everything that she had learned, everything that got her where she is, and she would have to use it to enter a space that she had been prepared to enter without her even knowing that she had been prepared to enter it. She would have to go it alone. She'd have to stand before the king. She'd have to trust that if she took one step, God would take two. And that's how it is for us when we find ourselves in rooms and in spaces, and we find that we have been called for such a time as this. That's what we know about Esther. That's what we know about her story. But let me tell you something somebody else. I believe that's also how Sojourner must have felt when voting rights were being argued back in 1851 at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron, when Sojourner slowly stood her 6'4" frame up, 143-pound self, and declared her truth to the rest of the crowd. Up to that point, she had hardly lifted her head, but she had realized that enough was enough. She had had all she could stand, and many in the audience hissed and booed and urged the moderator to not let her speak, but she moved slowly and solemnly to the front of the room, laid her bonnet at her feet, looked at the moderator with such intent that he knew he was going to have to let her speak. The crowd hissed from all areas of the room, but the moderator urged them to keep quiet as he arose and he announced Sojourner Truth. Her frame was as tall as the monument and her voice as deep as thunder. Though it wasn't loud, the room hushed at her first words and stilled throughout her speech. And she delivered that speech at a time, because that time and that voice, when they come together, and as God has so ordained, can't anybody or anything stop it. She delivered that speech at a time when she was being denied the right or the ability to vote, because she was both a woman and black. Now I need you to understand, white women were fighting for the same right at the same time, and black women marched alongside white women in the fight. But the white feminists did not necessarily include black women in their demands. And so Sojourner rose up straightforwardly, put it out on the floor for all to reckon with. She said, wait a minute now, white and black, male and female alike. She asked the question of the day, ain't I a woman? And then she closed with a direct affront to the one man in the room in particular. She called him out and said, that little man in black over there says that women can't have as many rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? She asked. Where did your Christ come from? She asked it again. And from God and a woman. She answered it before they could even think about it, before they had an answer. She said, and man had nothing to do with it. That was 1851, and she explained to them that their biases did not make any sense. It was an injustice. It was something that did not measure up to any sensibility of anybody. And she spoke up. She used her voice in that moment. Not only did she challenge them about their racist views and their sexist views, but she also challenged them around their theological views. She was letting them know that she knew that God and not man was in charge. And that's all really Esther is having to come to reckon with in this moment. That Haman is not in charge, and Mordecai is not even in charge, and the king is not even in charge. God is in charge, and God is on the side of the underdog, always coming to the aid of those who cannot stand for themselves. But God is looking for a voice to speak up and say what's right in the right moment, to do what's right in the right moment. This God who could do it all by God's self, for God is so powerful and so fully qualified that God could take care of it. But no. God is seeking to be co-workers together with us, that we might be in cahoots and cohesion with the plan of God, that we might stand up and be the ones that God is calling us to be, the ones that God has positioned us to be, the one that God has prepared us to be. That's my message for you this morning, that you need to understand that with God, all things are possible. With God on our side, there is no such thing as failure. For God is the only one who meets the requirement of having a reign that runs from everlasting to everlasting. And God will not let God's children be cast down forever. This God whose birth was not the beginning of him, and whose death was not the ending of him, who before anything was made, God had already been. And after everything is done, God still will be. This is God who is calling us into partnership to do what's right in the world. And so, as Sojourner was clear about that, Harriet was clear about that, Esther was clear about that, and so must we in these crazy, chaotic, ludicrous times when folks just won't do right, when those who have the power won't use it for good, then we must stand up and speak up because we have been positioned for such a time as this. Well, my friends, this is Pastor Cynthia Turner Wood bidding you farewell for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week for another installment of There's a Word for That. You can reach me at a word, the number 4, that at dayspringthrive.org. That's a word, the number 4, that at dayspringthrive.org. I look forward to hearing from you, and until next time, know that whatever the issue is, there is a word for that. For the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God lasts forever. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.